More than 250 people are feared to have died when a Pan Am jumbo jet crashed into the small Scottish town of Lockerbie. Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London Heathrow at 6:25, bound for New York. It crashed 54 minutes later. A petrol station and a number of houses were destroyed in the explosion. Several houses are still on fire. The emergency services have cordoned off a large area around the crash site. The 747 is believed to have broken in two in mid-air. The forward section is thought to have landed 3 miles east of Lockerbie. A large number of the 240 passengers are believed to have been American servicemen on a connecting flight from Frankfurt. They were returning home for Christmas. Dumfries and Galloway Hospital, the infirmary, said that they were not expecting...
Like, we were in front, ahead of, we were first to reach there. As we pulled up, there was just stones everywhere, like, and we could see burning rubble everywhere, all over the field beside them. We looked up the road, there was houses just everywhere, like, all burning. And we got out the car, run down, didn't know what to do, obviously, like. And as we just could see houses on fire everywhere, like, people just didn't know what to do. Just a disaster, like, you know. Just before Christmas this time of year, it's just terrible, isn't it, like.
Just debris all over the road. So we got out and did what we could in the way of seeing if there's anybody trapped in cars, but there was houses on fire everywhere. And as I say, there's nothing we could do, nothing at all. The roads are blocked and there's just people just wandering around, they don't know what to do, you know.
Pan American have issued an emergency phone number in London. It's 018976333. We'll bring you the latest as we get it throughout the evening and throughout the night. From ITN, good evening. "258 people are feared to have died in the Pan Am jumbo jet crash just north of the Scottish border. These pictures of the plane wreckage have just reached us. Flight PA 103 left London Heathrow for New York at 6:25 this evening. 56 minutes later, it crashed into the small town of Lockerbie in Dumfriesshire. It's now clear the plane broke up in mid-air. Pan Am have said there appear to be no survivors from the plane. The wreckage from the plane is strewn for miles around. Part of the cockpit has been discovered 4 miles east of Lockerbie. A cabin door has been discovered 18 miles away. There'll be a special report on the air disaster after the film.
Next on Central, we've a special ITN News Bulletin. After this, our programmes will continue approximately 25 minutes later than advertised. You're watching Central. Donahue will start at around 1:15. First, though, we're bringing you a special news bulletin from ITN.
There are no survivors from the Pan Am jumbo jet which crashed into the Scottish town of Lockerbie. 258 people are dead. The plane hit a petrol station and the south side of the town was destroyed. Homes and cars are still ablaze. The emergency services mount a major operation. The hospital tends the injured people of Lockerbie. Good evening. At least 258 people were killed in the Pan Am jumbo jet crash just north of the Scottish border. Pan Am says there were no survivors from the plane. Ambulance chiefs say at least 11 people were injured on the ground, 3 of them critically. Eyewitnesses said there was a gigantic ball of flame, 300 feet high, as the plane broke in two. There was no Mayday call. A petrol station and a number of houses were destroyed in the explosion and fire. It is Britain's worst ever air disaster. The Queen is said to be shocked and appalled, and Mrs. Thatcher expressed her deepest sympathy to all the bereaved families. The jumbo took off from Heathrow at 6:25. 55 minutes later, at 7:19, it disappeared from radar screens over Carlisle. Aviation officials say the plane was flying at 31,000 feet. It's likely the jumbo glided before it crashed 25 miles further north at Lockerbie. Pan Am have issued a new emergency phone number in London. It's 01 if you live outside London, 750-9548. That's 01 750-9548.
The shattered nose section of the Pan Am jumbo jet lies half crushed by its impact with the ground. It had apparently fallen from 6 miles up after a catastrophe that tore the jumbo jet apart. The flight had originated from Frankfurt in Germany and may have had many American servicemen on board. All the plane's occupants are dead. The wreckage was still smouldering hours after the crash, which happened after the plane had suddenly disappeared from air traffic control radar screens. There'd been no Mayday signal from the pilot, no sign at all that the Pan Am crew had any warning that disaster was imminent. Wreckage from one of the plane's engines had gouged a deep crater in the road. The southern part of the town of Lockerbie was devastated by the crash. Dozens of houses were set ablaze as flaming wreckage rained down from the sky without warning. It's not yet known how many casualties there were amongst the townspeople, but the figures were initially feared to be high. The crash came suddenly out of the night sky, causing panic.
And the whole sky lit up completely with just a red flash. And from that, there was a ball of fire went, what, 300 feet in the air and then mushroomed out. We thought it was a nuclear explosion, but obviously it wasn't. There's just people just wandering around. They don't know what to do, you know. It's a terrible place there, absolutely terrible.
Did you see any sign of life or survivors from the plane itself?
There's a crater maybe, what, 50 foot deep and maybe 100 yards long alongside the M74. There's nothing in that. It's just burning. That's all that's in there.
It was this almighty bang. My son and I were in the house, so I said, get down. And the whole sky lit up. And I realised it was a plane. But there was debris falling everywhere, and I thought the whole roof was going to cave in on us at the time, but looked out the back window and all I could see was fires starting up, you know, just right over the whole countryside was ablaze. And of course we just went out and started getting the people out of the houses round about. There's a lot of elderly people round the crest.
Everybody evacuated, are they?
All in our sections evacuated, and they're all okay. But the houses are, well, my house is completely destroyed now, and a lot of the houses are badly damaged.
Oh my God, it's terrible. And then sparks, and then the whole thing went down. I don't know what was happening. Like, I just got a fright, shaking I was.
And how long did it take for all that to happen?
Oh, not long.
No long.
A couple of seconds, maybe.
Seconds.
I thought it was a roll of thunder, and then the house started to shake, and it just, I'd come out and I seen the engine coming down. It just landed about 50 yards from my house, and it's made a right mess of the road, like.
What did it look like when it came down?
I could just see a big black ball coming, flaming from the sky, like.
At Dumfries Infirmary, doctors and nurses rushed from their homes to prepare for what they expected to be a mass of casualties. Rescue teams had been mobilised to the crash site from many parts of Scotland and northern England. A medical team was helicoptered in from Glasgow. A police car escorted vans from the local blood transfusion centre to the infirmary, bringing in large stocks of blood ready for the rush of victims they were expecting. Medical staff stood waiting and waiting, but very few casualties arrived. It was then that the size of the tragedy began to sink in. Consultant surgeon Mr. Smith-Syme then briefed his staff on what he knew.
There have been no survivors reported from the crashed aircraft, and we're waiting for Dr. Hill, who's the on-site medical officer, to give us an official stand down. He's not prepared to do so because they still have several helicopters flying around in the area, bringing in casualties to the academy and other locations. But so far, as I can make out, these casualties are corpses. He himself is not prepared to issue a general stand down until he knows what else might be brought in. I don't anticipate a vast number of people requiring treatment, and I think we could quite safely say to those who have turned up voluntarily that we probably won't require their services, and thank you very much for coming out.
What kind of casualty do you have in here at the hospital now?
At the moment we've had 2 or 3 minor burn injuries and 1 broken ankle, and that's all.
Tonight, crash investigators are being sent to the scene. They'll be searching for the 2 flight recorders in the hope the devices can give some clue as to why the jet apparently broke up in midair without warning.
Well, as the investigators set about their work for the emergency services, it's been an appalling night. The scene on the A74, the main border road between Scotland and England, the Gretna to Glasgow road, the wreckage was appalling. Firemen had to deal not only with the wreckage of vehicles, but also the flames created by the petrol that leaked from those cars. The wreckage from the aircraft was strewn over an area of 18 miles. Firemen wearing breathing apparatus and safety masks waded through the wreckage, but as we reported earlier, the casualty figures are a lot lower than the hospital authorities had originally feared. The Pan Am Jumbo is said to have hit the road and then carried on for about 3/4 of a mile before exploding. There's a huge crater beside the A74 at Lockerbie. But wreckage and bodies have been scattered over an 18-mile area. The plane cockpit was found 4 miles east of Lockerbie. The cabin door 18 miles away at Langham. Rescuers have found clothing at Westerlark 5 miles from Langham. Many of the passengers are thought to have been American Air Force personnel returning to the United States on Christmas leave.
The Pan Am Jumbo was due to arrive here at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport about an hour from now. And as friends and relatives of those on board began to arrive, they were shepherded to a private room to be told the tragic news. A Pan Am official said they'd not heard of any survivors. A team of airline experts is being flown to Carlisle to join the investigation into a disaster that's dominated the evening news here.
Disaster at Christmas. Pan Am 103 never makes it home.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. The simple facts are these. Pan Am's Flight 103 had been in the air for an hour. The 747 was en route from London to New York and then Detroit. According to Pan American, there were more than 240 passengers on board and a crew of 15.
A senior Pan Am official who called the first news conference was able to provide few details. He was asked if there was any indication of an explosion on board the aircraft.
We really don't. We have no indication. As I said, there was no prior indication that there were any problems with the aircraft. There was no contact prior, any Mayday signals. The aircraft had made normal contact with the control center at 1915. The last reported contact was at 1917.
Has Pan Am received any kind of threats in the past weeks or months? I mean,
no,
in London there were talk of IRA planning bombs. Has Pan Am received any threats in any city?
No, sir. No threats, and there was no indication that there was anything out of the norm with this aircraft this evening. We are right now formulating the passenger list. We're confirming exactly who was aboard, and we will begin the notification of next of kin.
This was an old aircraft put into service in February 1970. That's nearly 19 years ago. But Pan Am officials say that because of a major overhaul last year, it was effectively brand new. Those officials point out that after major disasters like this, there's always speculation, talk of mid-air collisions, explosions, terrorism. But for now, they say, that's all it is, speculation. There are, as yet, very few facts. Tim Hewitt, ITN, Washington.
Pan Am have just called us to say the telephone number they want friends and relatives to call is 01897 6333. That's 01 if you live outside London, 897 6333. Dozens of shocked relatives have been waiting for news at Heathrow Airport. One elderly couple walked down a corridor holding hands, tears in their eyes. And a group of Sikhs who had apparently dropped off a relative was ushered into an interview room by security staff at the airport.
They took away the Christmas tree in the Pan Am departure lounge as anxious relatives began to arrive desperately seeking information.
His mother's brother.
Yeah.
And he's totally devastated. And we've been trying to phone. We couldn't get through. And I have a restaurant, and I've just come rushing here, left the business, and I've just come here to bring him over to find out what has happened.
His uncle of mine.
You've been unable to find out anything?
Well, we heard the news that no survivors, but somebody just rang us saying that he didn't board the flight at all. So we're still not sure really what's happened.
We only know that someone flew to America. We don't even know on which plane. It could be BA. And BA, I rang him up BA, and they're so bloody minded, they said, we can't give you the name. I said, all I want to know is that man on the plane. And he said, no, I can't give you.
Just a relative of yours?
Yes.
British Airways have activated their Emergency Procedures Information Centre. Professionals and volunteers still arriving to man the phones and to comfort relatives until solid information is available.
We've got a room here where they can sit, they can have a cup of tea, they can talk with one another, and as soon as someone has some information to tell them about the persons that they want to hear of, then it will be communicated to them.
This centre will remain open throughout the night, offering comfort and hopefully information to those who think they have friends or relatives on board the plane. Vernon Mann, ITN, Heathrow.
The Civil Aviation Authority say they are puzzled by the crash. Eyewitnesses say they saw the jumbo break into two. A dozen accident investigators are flying out to the crash site. They'll be searching for the aircraft's black box to try to establish just what went wrong.
In the hours since the crash, the causes of this disaster have already narrowed. There was no mid-air collision, no pilot talkback that indicated impending catastrophe. It is then on fatigue in the airframe or a bomb that investigators will now centre their search. Only once before, for certain, has fatigue in the airframe caused a Boeing 747 jumbo to fall out of the sky. This Japan Airlines jumbo crashed in 1985 after a critical bulkhead had collapsed. More than 500 people were killed, but in that incident, the pilot had time to describe the ordeal to air traffic controllers. The plane became gradually uncontrollable and took many minutes finally to crash. Above Lockerbie last night, there appears to be no such time. Buried in the depths of the Indian Ocean, filmed only 2 weeks ago, a South African Airlines jumbo crashed in 1987, killing all 160 people aboard. Investigators here speculated about the airframe, proved nothing, and suspected a bomb. The Pan Am jumbo that crashed in Scotland was the 15th ever built. It's been flying ever since 1970. But since the Japan disaster, checks on the airframe have been rigorous, modifications considerable. Amongst Pan Am people I've called, no one suspects the airframe. That leaves the question of a bomb. The only time an almost certain bombing of a jumbo ever happened was off Ireland, when this Air India jumbo was downed, no pilot talkback, it just disappeared off the radar screens. Over 300 people died, Sikh extremists were suspected. Tonight's flight originated in Frankfurt, West Germany, but though the flight numbers stayed the same, the plane changed in London. All passengers had to tranship to the doomed jumbo. One who got off did notice something odd in Frankfurt.
The man in front of me was getting very agitated, very nervous. The policeman was taking a very long time checking his passport. He had an American passport. He was of Middle East descent. I couldn't tell you which country. But he was getting very upset. He looked at me, he looked at the floor, he looked everywhere, but he wouldn't look at the policeman. He turned around watching everybody while he was putting his passport away, and he seemed very agitated.
Back in 1985, this TWA jet was hijacked to Beirut. For many months, the trial has been underway in West Germany of Mohammed Hamadi, accused of both hijacking the plane and killing an American Navy man aboard. It's obviously too early to conclude for certain that Pan Am 103 was the victim of a bomb, but as peace breaks out across the world, there have been many in the diplomatic community who've been waiting for the first extremist to break cover in rebellion. The extraordinary change in the Palestinian position with Yasser Arafat's speech at the UN, peace in Namibia. The UN commissioner to Namibia was aboard this flight. South African Foreign Minister Pik Botha was on an earlier flight. Africa has no history of air attacks. The Arab world has much.
John Snow, our diplomatic editor. Now, Mark Webster, who's in Lockerbie, has the latest. Mark, when we spoke on News at 10 earlier, you talked about the devastation in Lockerbie. What's the latest scene?
The rescue services now have things under control, Alastair. A few minutes ago, a senior police officer gave the first press conference since the crash. What he had to say was that he confirmed that all 273 people on board are dead. He said there was no hope for any survivors at all. He said such was the impact of the collision that the wreckage is spread for 10 miles around the area where it originally hit the earth. He said there were 6 different locations where there were substantial pieces of wreckage, and bodies were scattered all around each of those bits of wreckage. As far as the local civilians, he said he wasn't aware of how many dead there were from the local houses, but he said less than a dozen had actually been taken to the infirmary at Dumfries.
Mark, what's the mood amongst the emergency services? We saw pictures of firemen a moment ago picking through the debris of burnt cars and hospital staff turning up to do their best. What's their mood?
I think it's honest to say, having talked to some of them, that they're almost as stunned as the locals, despite the fact that they've probably seen a great deal during their careers. They simply cannot believe the impact and the scale of the devastation that that collision actually brought about. I mean, it is exactly as though a very substantial bomb had gone off.
The investigators are on their way, as we reported, as indeed is the Scottish Secretary Malcolm Rifkind. What arrangements are being made for the people who are going to meet them and the survivors?
They're going to be flown in by helicopter as soon as possible so that they can be taken around. Senior police officers will be escorting them. They'll obviously be wanting to see some of those who are still in a state of shock from the accident itself. They've been cared for by the WRVS and other locals. Many of those who were in the houses near the scene of the impact are staying tonight with friends and relatives in the area.
Mark Webster, thank you very much indeed. And that's the latest on Britain's worst ever air disaster. At least 258 people were killed. There were no survivors on the plane. The leader of the House of Commons, John Wakeham, made an emergency statement to MPs tonight. The Scottish Secretary is flying to the scene. The Transport Secretary will speak tomorrow morning. And the emergency phone number, 01897 6333. 01897 6333. From all of us, good night.
Because of extended news coverage throughout the night, programmes are now running approximately 20 minutes later than advertised. But the main ITN morning news will be on time at 5 o'clock. Next, Donahue.